Hey gang, and welcome back. Just so you know, you can use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, one word, at flipsidegaming.com to get 10% off orders $10 or more. You can also use the promo code at Original Magic Art on everything except for paintings. And finally, you can use the code at mtg.multizone.ca to get 10% off of your orders of singles. Using the code will help you save some money and help out the channel at the same time. Just to let you know, Flipside Gaming is going to be giving away a full set of Commander 2019 when it releases to one lucky winner. The contest will be running from July 12th until August 26th, and all you have to do to enter is either use my promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, no spaces, on an order of over $10 or more, or you can send a stamped, self-addressed envelope or postcard to Flipside Gaming. It's one entry per person, so good luck, have fun, and I hope you win. Hey gang, to the surprise of no one, we have another EDH game today. First up, we've got Dean playing Niv-Mizzet the Parun, keeping a Highland Lake, an Island, Seat of the Synod, Obsessive Search, Sorcerous Sight, Sonic Burst, and Darksteel Ingot. Dom is back playing his Prime Speaker Vannifar, keeping Kiyora's Follower, Concordant Crossroads, Command Tower, Frilled Mystic, Ornithopter, Heritage Druid, and an Island. John is playing Karador, keeping a Birthing Pod, a Caustic Caterpillar, a Marsh Flats, a Demonic Tutor, a Swamp, Animate Dead, and a Plains. Steve is back playing Muldrotha, and he keeps Pajuka Bog, Plaguecrafter, Forest, Hinterland Harbor, Animate Dead, and a Massacre Worm. Dean wins the die roll and starts us off. Dean plays a tapped Highland Lake, passing to Dom. Dom plays his Command Tower, and uses it to cast a Heritage Druid. Steve plays a Forest and passes. John plays a Marsh Flats and casts his Caustic Caterpillar, cracking his fetch and searching for an appropriate land while passing turn. Dean plays Seat of the Synod and casts his Sorcerous Sight. He looks at Dom's hand and then draws a card. Dean then pays 1 blue for Obsessive Search, drawing a card before passing turn. Dom plays an Island and casts Kiyora's Follower. Steve plays Hinterland Harbor and casts a pair of Lightning Greaves. John plays a Plains and then casts Demonic Tutor before passing turn. Dean plays an Island and we see a Darksteel Ingot. He taps the ingot to cast Faithless Looting, drawing 2 and then discarding 2 and passing to Dom. Dom plays a Forest and taps it to cast a Crop Rotation, sacrificing the very forest he tapped. He goes and grabs an Ancient Tomb and puts it to field. Dom then taps the Command Tower for a green, casting Concordant Crossroads. He uses the Kiyora's Follower to untap his Command Tower, and then taps out for Vannifar, taking 2 from the tomb. Dom then taps his Commander, sacrificing the Follower to go and find a 3-drop. He puts a Bounding Krasis onto the field, untapping Vannifar, and then immediately taps her again and sacrifices the Krasis. This time he grabs a Breaching Hippocamp, untapping Vannifar again, and retaps her to go and find a 5-drop. He settles for a Disciple of the Ring and passes to Steve. Steve plays a Swamp and he casts Plaguecrafter. And everyone has to sacrifice a creature before he passes turn. John plays a Swamp and uses Dance of the Dead to bring back the Plaguecrafter. This has Dean realize he should have discarded a card to the Plaguecrafter first, and Dom lets Vannifar hit the command zone. Steve also discards a card, and Massacre Worm hits the graveyard, while Dean dumps 2 cards total. Dean plays an Island and pays 2 for Teleria Winds, discarding his hand and then drawing that many. He then uses a Preordain to scry 2 and then draws before passing. Dom hits another land and passes. Steve plays a Misty Rainforest and cracks it, and he finds a Watery Grave, having it come in untapped and taking 2 more. He passes to John. John casts Life from the Loam in his main phase, returning his Marsh Flats. He replays it and cracks it to find a Savannah. We then see an Animate Dead hitting the field. The Animate Dead then brings back the Plaguecrafter. Dom flashes in Deceiver Exarch. and Dom sacrifices it while Steve and Dean discard a card. Dean plays a mountain, and boldly casts his commander considering how many edict effects have happened in these last 2 turns. Dom plays a Llanowar Elves, and passes. Steve casts his Crucible of Worlds in his main phase, replaying his Misty and cracking it for a land. He grabs an Overgrown Tomb, taking another 2, and he passes to John. John dredges back his life from the loam, revealing 3 cards and binning them. He then recasts the life, which has Dean draw a card, and he gets to ping with Niv-Mizzet. And the Llanowar Elves take the 1. John returns 2 lands to his hand, and he replays the flats. He then cracks it, taking 1 to go and find a scrubland. We then see a Ramunap Excavator hitting the field, and John passes to Dean. Dean draws and deals 1 to Dom with Niv. He then casts a Wayfarer's Bauble before passing turn. Dom sadly can't seem to find any more lands, and has to pass. Steve plays another basic, and brings up Muldrotha. With his Elemental Commander resolving, he equips it with the Greaves, and passes. John judges again, revealing 3 more cards. He plays a Strip Mine, and sacrifices it to take out Dom's Ancient Tomb, which is pretty rude, John. John then recasts the life, returning the mine and flats to his hand, with Dean drawing a card and dealing 1 to the Excavator with Niv. John then loses 2 life to help cast Birthing Pod, and he passes. At the end of turn, Dean uses Burst Lightning to finish off the Excavator, which also triggers Niv-Mizzet. This lets him draw a card, and he deals 1 to John, and then the lightning resolves. Dean then also cracks his Bauble to find a basic, and starts his turn. Dean draws for turn, and deals 1 to John again. He casts a Library of Ling, followed by a Whirlpool Rider. He shuffles his hand in, drawing only 1 sadly, and he deals it to Dom. Dom draws, and casts Arbor Elf before passing to Steve. Steve casts Burnished Heart in his main phase, and passes to John. John dredges again, because who needs to draw, and returns the life to his hand. He plays a Forest, and with more than enough creatures, is able to cast Karador for only 1 of each colored mana. John then moves to cast Safi, and with her on the stack, Dean uses Tarfire to target Karador. He draws from Niv-Mizzet, dealing 1 to the Arbor Elf with Niv's triggered ability. Safi then resolves, and John then loses 2 life and taps 1 mana to activate his Birthing Pod, and we say goodbye to Safi and hello to Aven Mind Sensor. Dean draws for turn and pings the Mind Sensor with Niv's ability. He then plays a Halimar Depth, rearranging his top 3 cards. Dean then uses Flame Slash, targeting Karador, and draws from Niv, dealing 1 more to John. Dean then moves to combat, and Niv gets in there, dealing 5 to John. Dom continues to do stuff despite his lack of lands, and he casts a Hangerback Walker where the X's are 1. Steve untaps and sacrifices his Burnished Heart to find 2 basics, putting them to the field tapped, and then passes. John draws for turn and casts a Remorseless Cleric before replaying his Strip Mine. He then loses another 2 life to pot away the Cleric, and goes to find a 3-drop. He puts Recruiter the Guard to the field, and gets to go and tutor for a Viscera Seer, putting it to hand. He then recasts the life from the loam, which lets Dean draw a card, and ping the Recruiter for 1, while John returns some lands to his hand. John then passes, and at the end of turn, Dean uses Gutshot to deal 1 to John. This lets him put Niv's ability on the stack, to which John responds by sacrificing his Strip Mine to tank 1 of Dean's lands. Dean then draws a card, and deals 1 to John. Dean draws for turn, and deals 1 to John. He plays a Mountain, and he casts Wee Dragonauts, which is a fun card to say, and then casts a Lightning Bolt targeting John. He draws from Niv's trigger first, and deals 1 to John, and then 3 from the Bolt. The Bolt in turn pumps the Dragonauts as well, and we then see a Star Compass hitting the stack. Moving to combat, Dean is able to swing everything at John for 9 because of the Anchor in his yard, giving the Dragonauts haste. At the end of turn, Dom puts another +1/+1 counter on his Hangerback Walker. Dom draws and has to pass again. Steve casts a Glenelendra Archmage in his main phase, and he brings back his Animate Dead with Muldrotha. This lets him return the Plaguecrafter, and responding to the Plaguecrafter's ability, Dom adds another counter to his Hangerback Walker, and then sacrifices it. He gets 3 tokens as it dies. Heading to combat, Muldrotha goes at Dean for 6. John draws instead of dredging, replaying his marsh flats once more, and cracking it and losing 1 to go and find a plains. He's then able to recast Karador, who in turn lets him recast the Remorseless Cleric. John then sacrifices it to exile Dean's graveyard. Dean draws and deals 1 to John. He casts Firebolt, which Steve tries to counter by sacrificing his Glendolender Archmage. It works, but Dean still gets to draw a card from casting a spell, and he deals 1 damage to John. Dean then pays 5 to flash it back again, targeting Steve for 2. With this on the stack, he resolves Niv-Mizzet's trigger first, drawing a card and using the Niv trigger to ping Glendolendra, and the Glendolender Archmage goes to the graveyard. Dean then casts a Burning Inquiry, resolving the Niv-Mizzet trigger first, drawing a card and dealing 1 to John, and then draws 3 cards with Burning Inquiry, dealing 3 more. They then have to all discard 3 cards at random. Dean then pays 2 life to cast a Gitaxian Probe, drawing from the Niv-Mizzet trigger and dealing 1 to Steve, and then dealing 1 to Steve from drawing from the spell. He also gets to look at Steve's hand. Dean then cycles a Lonely Sandbar and draws a card, dealing 1 to Steve again. Heading to combat, Dean swings the Wee Dragonauts and Niv-Mizzet at Steve for 14, before passing to Dom. Dom draws and plays a tap land. He casts a Boreal Druid, and then a free Phyrexian Walker before passing to Steve. Steve untaps and drops the Gitrog monster. He then plays a High Market from his yard, and uses Animate Dead to bring back the Glendolender Archmage. Moving to combat, Muldrotha goes at Dean again for 6, and Steve passes. Dean draws, and deals 1 to Steve with Niv's ability. He casts Frantic Search, which triggers Niv, but Steve counters it with the Glendolender Archmage before its spell resolves. Dean still gets to draw a card, and deals 1 to Steve's Glendolendra. We then see a Blazing Volley hitting the stack, and pinging a bunch of creatures. With the spell being cast, Dean gets to draw a card, and ping Steve for 1 with Niv-Mizzet's ability. We then see Careful Study hitting the stack, letting Dean draw a card from Niv-Mizzet, and then 2 from the spell, dealing 3 damage to Steve. He also has to discard 2 cards. Dean then casts Peek to look at Steve's hand, drawing a card from Niv's ability, and then the spell itself, and dealing 2 to him. He also gets to look at Dom's hand this time. You'll note that he's keeping all of his spells on the side. This is so he doesn't forget a trigger from the Wee Dragonauts. Dean then casts Traveler's Amulet before heading in combat. He swings the Dragonauts at Steve to finish him off, and Niv-Mizzet at Dom. In his second main phase, Dean then cracks the amulet while finding a land, and passes. Dom draws, and with nothing to play, passes. Dean is still shuffling at this point, because Dom is so quick on the draw. He draws for turn, dealing 1 to Dom. Dean then plays a command tower and casts Brainstorm, dealing 1 from drawing with Niv, and then dealing 3 more from drawing with Brainstorm before putting 2 back. Dean then casts Incinerate where X is 1, drawing from the Niv trigger, and dealing 1 to Dom. Electrickery then goes on the stack, targeting the Disciple of the Ring, and Dean draws a card from Niv and pings Dom for 1. And once more the Dragonauts are getting pumped for each spell. Heading to combat, Niv and the Dragonauts hit Dom for 12. Dom draws and plays a land, and passes. Dean draws and deals 1 to Dom. We then see Dean exiling most of his graveyard to help cast Treasure Cruise. He puts the Niv-Mizzet trigger on the stack, which Dom responds to by countering the cruise with a Frilled Mystic. Dean then still draws from the trigger and deals 1 to Dom, and then drops a Firebrand Archer. He swings the Dragonauts and Niv at Dom, and Dom, knowing when he's beat, scoops it up. Game review time. So I would say this game is a perfect example of what I consider a non-turn. This is essentially when people have nothing to do on their or other people's turns and just keep passing around. There were a few very odd plays, for instance Steve using his Burnished Heart on his main phase as opposed to at the end of someone else's turn. There was also a lot of unnecessary life loss using fetch lands to find shock lands and having them come in untapped and then never using that mana. I do think that Dom was a potential threat for most of this game with Vannifar, and his chaining cycle was pretty fantastic to see. Unfortunately, once that finished, and after a round or 2 of Playcrafter, he pretty much had nothing. I do think John using the Strip Mine did take him out of the game, but it probably would have been in the best interest of the rest of the table had he stayed in and helped fight Dean back. I think Steve's Muldrotha deck suffered the most since he drew so many lands and just didn't have anything. He could keep recurring the Plaguecrafter, but that really wasn't going to get him very far. I think John's deck was starting to go off, but unfortunately a lot of his creatures were 1 power, and once the Niv-Mizzet had resolved, he really couldn't keep them on the board or pod them away easily. And if you were wondering, yes, all of Dean's cards in his deck were either common or uncommons. He didn't have a single rare or mythic in his deck, and the deck itself was very, very budget. It's pretty cool to see a budget deck do so well, especially when across from him is someone playing the original dual lands, which cost a pretty penny. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.